I still remember the exact moment I knew our marriage had changed forever. And it wasn't when my wife's hand found his knee under the table. It was earlier than that. It was the way she looked at him when he walked through our front door, like she was seeing a version of a man she'd been waiting for her whole life, and she just didn't know it yet. My name is Jake, and this is the story of how one dinner party imploded everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the person I'd shared a bed with for 7 years. It started out so innocent, so painfully suburban and normal that I almost laugh when I think back on it now. We were that couple, the ones who had the nice house in the outer ring of Atlanta, the 2 dogs, the weekend routine of farmers markets and home improvement projects that never quite got finished. We were the ones who sent out Christmas cards with our faces on them, wearing matching sweaters because we thought it was cute and ironic. We were so comfortable it was suffocating, but in a way that felt like safety. That was our life. That was our trap. It was a Saturday in late October, the kind where the Georgia heat finally breaks and you can actually open your windows without the AC fighting a losing battle against the humidity. We'd met this couple, Mark and Vanessa, at a brewery a few weeks earlier. They were new to the neighborhood, having moved from Chicago for Mark's job in finance. He was one of those guys who had that effortless athletic build, the kind that suggested he played lacrosse in college and still did triathlons on the weekends for fun. He had a jaw that looked like it was carved from granite and hair that was just starting to salt and pepper at the temples. He was handsome in a way that felt almost aggressive, like he was daring you to compare yourself to him and lose. Vanessa was beautiful too, in a different way. She was softer, with wide eyes and a nervous laugh that made you want to protect her from something. She was a graphic designer who worked from home, and she seemed a little overwhelmed by the move, a little lost in the shadow of her husband's larger-than-life personality. My wife, Rachel, had taken to her immediately. I saw it as Rachel being her usual hospitable self, gathering strays and making them feel welcome. Rachel had a gift for that. She could make anyone feel like they were the most interesting person in the room. It was one of the things I loved most about her, that genuine curiosity about people. So when Rachel suggested we invite them over for dinner, I thought nothing of it. I was actually excited. Our social circle had gotten stale. It was the same old friends from college, the same conversations about mortgages and toddler milestones. Mark and Vanessa seemed like a breath of fresh air, sophisticated and a little mysterious. Rachel spent the whole week planning the menu, a complicated seafood paella that took hours to prepare. She cleaned the house until it sparkled, lit candles that smelled like sandalwood and bergamot, and even bought a new record to play on the vintage turntable we'd restored together. It was the vinyl of some obscure indie band we'd discovered on our honeymoon. It was a detail, a loving gesture. I remember thinking how lucky I was, watching her move through the kitchen, her hair tied up in a messy bun, a smudge of flour on her cheek. She was so focused, so intent on making the night perfect. They arrived at 7 on the dot. Mark was carrying a bottle of expensive scotch and a bouquet of flowers so artfully arranged it could have been a centerpiece at a wedding. Vanessa was wearing a simple silk dress the color of rust, and she looked nervous, like she was afraid she'd break a glass or say the wrong thing. I opened the door, shook Mark's hand, and gave Vanessa a quick hug. It was all very normal. But then Rachel came into the hallway from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, and the air in the room shifted. She smiled at Mark, and it wasn't her typical hostess smile. It was softer, more shy. There was a flicker of something in her eyes that I'd seen before, but it had been a long time, and it wasn't directed at me anymore. "Mark, I'm so glad you could make it," she said, her voice a little breathless. She reached out and touched his arm, a gesture that was meant to be welcoming, but felt electric, charged. Mark, for his part, didn't flinch. He just smiled back, that predatory, perfect smile, and said, "We wouldn't have missed it, Rachel. The place looks incredible." The way he said her name, rolling the syllables off his tongue like it was something precious, made a knot tighten in my stomach. I dismissed it immediately. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was projecting some weird insecurity onto a perfectly innocent interaction. I was being a jealous husband, seeing ghosts where there were none. Rachel was loyal. Rachel loved me. We had a life together. We moved to the living room, and I poured the drinks. Rachel had made a selection of appetizers, little crostinis with figs and goat cheese, and she was fawning over Vanessa, asking her about her design projects and if she'd found a good yoga studio yet. Vanessa was engaging, but her eyes kept darting to Mark, checking in, making sure he was okay, that he was happy. It was that quiet, submissive devotion that some wives have, and for a second, I felt a pang of pity for her. She seemed so swallowed up by him. Mark, meanwhile, was working the room. He was talking about his company, about a big merger they were navigating, and he was funny and charming, weaving anecdotes that made me and Rachel laugh. He had this ability to make you feel like you were the only person in the room, even when he was addressing a group. I watched him interact with Rachel, the way he leaned in when she spoke, the way his gaze would drift down to her lips and then back up to her eyes. It was a calculated move, a skill honed in boardrooms and bars, and he was deploying it with surgical precision. But Rachel was eating it up. She was laughing too hard at his jokes, touching her hair more than usual, leaning into his space. The knot in my stomach grew tighter, but I ignored it, trying to focus on my conversation with Vanessa about her artwork. Dinner was a spectacle. Rachel had outdone herself. The paella was perfect, a golden brown crust of rice with succulent shrimp and mussels, and the table was set with our good china and crystal, a wedding gift we rarely used. The candles flickered, the wine flowed, and the conversation became looser, more personal. We started talking about how we met. Vanessa and Mark's story was a world-round romance, a chance encounter at a coffee shop in Chicago that led to a 2-week road trip down the California coast. It sounded like a movie. My story with Rachel was simpler, more grounded. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue. I was grilling burgers, she was trying to open a bottle of wine. It was messy and real, and I thought it was beautiful. But as the night wore on, the dynamic became like a magnet and a piece of metal. I was the magnet, stuck to the fridge, holding up the grocery lists and the kids' drawings, mundane and reliable. Mark was the metal, a shiny, sharp object being drawn inexorably toward Rachel's core. I saw it in the way they started to have their own private conversations within the larger group. I saw it in the way he'd whisper something in her ear, and she'd blush and swat his arm. I saw it in the way Vanessa's smile would falter for a split second when she caught sight of them. I saw it in my own reflection in the window, a man becoming a ghost in his own home. After dinner, we retired to the living room with the rest of the scotch. Rachel put on the new record, and the smooth, melancholic voice of the singer filled the room. Vanessa was curled up in the armchair, looking exhausted and a little drunk. I was on the couch, and Mark sat on the other end, leaving a massive, intentional space between us. Rachel came and sat in the middle, but she leaned toward him, her knee brushing against his leg. I told myself it was an accident. The couch wasn't that big. There was nowhere else to sit. But then she put her hand down on the cushion, and his hand was there too, and their pinkies were touching. They were touching. They were sitting in my house, on my couch, listening to my wedding song, and they were touching. It was the pinky touch that broke something in me. It was so small, so innocent, yet so loaded with intention. It was the way you touch someone when you want to see if they'll let you. It was a question, and by the look on Rachel's face, she wasn't just answering it, she was rewriting the whole goddamn test. I stared at the point of contact, a tiny, damning piece of evidence, and I felt a cold wave of nausea wash over me. I saw them pull away simultaneously, as if they'd been burned. Mark cleared his throat and took a sip of his scotch. Rachel tucked her hair behind her ear, her cheeks flushed. They both knew I saw, and they both knew I'd say nothing. That was the most sickening part. They were already a team, conspiring against my sanity, and they knew my weakness. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The rest of the night is a blur of polite goodbyes, of me shaking Mark's hand and feeling his skin on mine, and wanting to punch him square in his perfectly structured face. I remember Vanessa giving me a hug that lingered a second too long, and I felt a strange, silent kinship with her. We were the leftovers, the discarded packaging. We were the ones who saw too much and had no idea what to do about it. Rachel closed the door behind them, and the house was suddenly too quiet, the silence ringing in my ears louder than the music had been. She turned to me, her face a mask of contentment. Well, that was fun, right? They're great. I really like them. Her eyes were searching mine, waiting for confirmation, for the usual routine of, honey, that was a wonderful evening. I forced a smile, the muscles in my face aching from the effort. Yeah, I said, my voice hollow. They were great. I walked past her to the kitchen, my legs feeling like lead, and started cleaning up. I scraped the remains of the paella into the trash, the clatter of the dishes a dull, jarring sound that matched the chaos in my head. I was replaying the night in my head on a loop, searching for something, anything I could have done differently. But there was nothing. It had been happening all night, right under my nose. They had been flirting, touching, and communicating in a language I didn't speak. Rachel came into the kitchen and wrapped her arms around me from behind, resting her head on my back. It was our ritual. It was supposed to be comforting. "Thanks for being so great tonight, honey," she murmured, her voice muffled. "You're the best host." I felt her lips press against my shirt, a kiss meant for my shoulder blade. But all I could feel was the ghost of her pinky touching his. All I could think about was the way she looked at him, like he was the answer to a question she'd forgotten she'd asked, a question I clearly didn't have the answer to. I knew something had cracked. I didn't know how bad it was or how far it would go, but the foundation of my marriage, the bedrock of trust I had built my entire life on, had developed a hairline fracture. And as I stood there, letting my wife hold me, pretending everything was fine, I knew with a sickening certainty that I was going to be the last person to know the full truth of what I had just witnessed. I felt like I was holding a grenade, and the pen was already out. The only question was when it would explode. The only question was what would be left of us when it did.
The days that followed that dinner party were a masterclass in psychological warfare, except I was the only one who knew we were at war. Rachel went about her life with the same serene efficiency she always had, and that normalcy became the most unsettling thing of all. She'd wake up, make coffee, kiss me on the forehead, and ask if I wanted eggs or oatmeal for breakfast. She'd fold the laundry while watching her morning shows, complaining about a stain on one of my work shirts or the way the dogs had tracked mud across the kitchen floor. She was the same woman I'd married, the same woman I'd built a life with, and yet she felt like a stranger wearing my wife's skin. Every smile she gave me felt borrowed. Every touch felt like she was rehearsing for something else. I couldn't sleep. That was the first thing that really started to break me. I'd lie in bed next to her, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathing even out into that soft, rhythmic pattern I'd memorized over years of shared nights. She'd curl up against my side, her head on my chest, and I'd lie there rigid, my arm going numb because I was too afraid to move, too afraid to disturb the fragile piece of a marriage that I was now convinced was built on sand. My mind would race through the events of that night, dissecting every glance, every touch, every whispered word I'd overheard. I'd play it back like a film director searching for a hidden clue, and every time I watched it, I found more evidence, more damning details, more reasons to believe that my wife was falling for another man. At work, I was useless. I'm a project manager for a commercial real estate firm, and my job requires precision, focus, and the ability to juggle about 100 moving parts at once. But all I could see when I looked at spreadsheets were Rachel's eyes following Mark across the room. All I could hear when I was on conference calls was her breathless little laugh at something he'd said. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Chloe, kept asking me if I was okay, and I'd brush her off with some excuse about allergies or a stomach bug. I'd lock myself in the bathroom stall and just stand there, gripping the cold metal of the partition, trying to convince myself I was being irrational. I'd tell myself I was turning into one of those guys, the jealous, possessive ones who drive their wives away with their insecurity. I'd tell myself to trust her, to trust us. But then I'd remember the pinky touch, and the bile would rise in my throat again. Rachel started mentioning Mark more often. At first, it was subtle. She'd say something about Vanessa, how sweet she was, how she seemed a little lonely, and then she'd naturally bring up Mark in the same breath. "Vanessa said Mark is traveling to New York next week for work," she'd say, not looking at me, stirring her coffee. "She seems a bit stressed about being alone. I told her I'd take her to that wine bar on Friday if she wanted to get out of the house." I'd nod, grateful that she was including me in the conversation, but also suspicious. Why was she so focused on Mark's schedule? Why did she care if Vanessa was alone or not? It felt like she was positioning herself, creating opportunities. Then the text messages started. It was late on a Tuesday night, and Rachel had fallen asleep on the couch while we were watching some forgettable crime drama. Her phone was on the coffee table, and it buzzed with a notification. I glanced at it out of habit, not really thinking,
and saw the name on the screen. Mark. My heart stopped. My hand moved before my brain could catch up, and I picked up her phone. I knew the passcode, of course. We'd always been open with each other about that stuff. Trust, right? That was what we had. I told myself I was just going to check the time. I told myself I was just going to see what he wanted. Probably something boring about a neighborhood barbecue or a contractor recommendation. But I opened the message and my stomach dropped through the floor. It was a photo. Nothing explicit, nothing that would hold up in court as evidence of an affair. It was a picture of a cocktail, a beautiful amber-colored drink in a crystal glass, with a note that said, "This one's for you. Reminds me of your eyes." I stared at the screen, my thumb trembling over the glass. Her eyes. He was talking about her eyes. He was sending her cocktail photos at 11 o'clock at night and telling her they reminded him of her eyes. And underneath it, her response, which she'd already sent. A string of emojis. A blushing face. A cocktail glass. A winking face. My wife, who never used emojis, who complained that they were juvenile and unprofessional, had sent this man a string of flirtatious little pictures in the middle of the night. I scrolled up, my vision blurring. There was a whole conversation, stretching back several days. It started out innocent enough, about the dinner party, thanking her for a wonderful evening, but then it became more familiar. She was asking about his day, about his business trip, about what he was wearing. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like I'm making it up, like I'm exaggerating to make the story more dramatic, but I'm not. She literally asked him what he was wearing, and he'd replied with something about a suit and tie, and she'd said, "I bet you look devastating." Devastating. She called him devastating, and he'd sent her a selfie, a picture of himself in a hotel room, his tie loosened, his hair slightly disheveled, with that infuriating, confident smirk on his face. I felt like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out my lungs. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just stared at the screen, reading through the exchange over and over again, memorizing every word, every emoji, every implication. They talked about music, about books, about how they both hated the cold and loved the rain.
They talked about their childhoods, their regrets, their secret dreams. He told her she was too good for Atlanta, that she was meant for a bigger city, a bigger life. And she told him that he made her feel seen, that he made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. Years. That cut deeper than anything else, because it meant she wasn't feeling alive with me. It meant I was the one who'd been failing her. And this man, this interloper, had come along and shown her what she was missing. I put the phone down, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. I looked over at Rachel, still sleeping on the couch, her lips slightly parted, her face peaceful and unguarded. She looked like an angel. She looked like the woman I'd pledged my life to. And she was texting another man that he made her feel alive. I wanted to wake her up. I wanted to scream at her, to throw the phone in her face and demand an explanation. I wanted to grab the car keys and drive to Mark's house and beat him until his pretty face was unrecognizable. But I did none of that. I sat there, frozen in a nightmare that was entirely my own, and I did the only thing I could think of. I put the phone back on the coffee table, exactly where I'd found it. I turned off the TV. I gently shook her awake and said, "Hey, babe, let's go to bed." She smiled at me, that soft, sleepy smile that used to make my heart soar. She took my hand and let me lead her to the bedroom, and I felt like a traitor to myself. I was betraying my own rage, my own grief, by pretending everything was okay. But I wasn't ready to blow it all up. I wasn't ready to confront the truth, because the truth was a monster that would devour everything I'd ever known. If I confronted her, she could deny it. She could gaslight me, make me feel like the crazy one. If I confronted him, she'd find out, and she'd be furious with me for invading her privacy. There was no winning. There was only the slow, agonizing death of everything I thought we had. Over the next week, I became a detective in my own marriage. I watched her like a hawk. I noticed how she'd smile at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. I noticed how she'd take longer showers, how she'd started wearing lingerie to bed, lingerie she'd never worn for me. I noticed how she'd stopped complaining about her job, about her mother, about the little daily annoyances that used to be the texture of our lives together. She was happy. She was glowing. And it wasn't because of me. It was because of him. He was giving her something I couldn't. And the more I watched, the more I realized it wasn't just sexual tension. It was emotional. It was deep. It was a connection that threatened to drown me. Vanessa, poor, oblivious Vanessa, started coming over more often. Rachel would invite her for coffee, for lunch, for long walks through the neighborhood. I think Rachel genuinely liked her, or at least she liked the proximity she provided to Mark. Vanessa would talk about her marriage, about how Mark worked too much, how he was distant, how she felt like she was losing him, and Rachel would listen, her face a mask of sympathy, nodding along and offering advice. She'd tell Vanessa to be patient, that men are complicated, that he probably just needed space. And I'd sit there, listening to my wife counsel another woman on how to keep her husband, while simultaneously emotionally cheating with that same husband. It was so twisted, so morally bankrupt that I started to question if I even knew who Rachel was anymore. I was living with a stranger. I started drinking, not heavily, not to the point of blacking out, but enough to take the edge off. A glass of whiskey when I got home from work, another one before bed. The burn in my throat was a welcome distraction from the burn in my chest. Rachel noticed, of course. She asked me if I was stressed about work, if there was something I wanted to talk about, and I'd look at her, this woman I loved, this woman I was losing, and I'd say, "It's nothing, honey, just a tough project." She'd accept it because she wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe I was the same stable, predictable husband she'd married, because if I was falling apart, it would force her to look at the wreckage she was creating. The breaking point, or at least the first real breaking point, came on a Friday night. Rachel had gone out with Vanessa to that wine bar she'd mentioned, and I stayed home with the dogs. I was supposed to be watching a game, but I couldn't focus. I just kept looking at the clock, counting the minutes until she came home. At 10 o'clock, I got a text from her. "Vanessa had to leave early, so I'm heading home soon. Do you want me to pick up anything?" I said no, but something in my gut told me to drive to the wine bar. It was a 20-minute drive, and the whole way there, I told myself I was being insane. I was going to show up and find them having a perfectly innocent conversation, and I'd look like a controlling, paranoid fool. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to see. I parked across the street and peered through the window of the bar, and there they were, Rachel and Mark, sitting in a corner booth, their heads close together, talking with an intensity that was palpable even from outside. She was laughing, her hand on his arm, and he was leaning in, whispering something in her ear. It was intimate. It was romantic. It was everything that a married woman should not be doing with a man who wasn't her husband. I sat there in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, and I watched them for a full 10 minutes. I watched the way she'd bite her lip when he spoke. I watched the way he'd touch her knee under the table. I watched the way they'd look at each other, like they were the only two people in the entire world. I wanted to burst through the door. I wanted to shatter their perfect little bubble. But I stayed frozen, a coward in the dark, watching my wife fall in love with another man. I saw her glance at her phone and then stand up. She was leaving. I watched her give him a hug, a long, lingering embrace that was far too intimate for a friend. I watched him kiss her cheek, his lips brushing against her skin, and then she walked out of the bar, and I ducked down in my seat, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure she could hear it. I waited for her to get in her car and drive away, and then I followed her home. I made sure to take a different route, to come in through the back door, so she wouldn't know I'd been gone. When she got home, she was cheerful, almost giddy. She told me all about her night with Vanessa, how they'd talked about art and books, how much fun she'd had. She didn't mention Mark. She didn't mention that he'd been there. She lied to my face, smoothly and effortlessly, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever witnessed.
I felt a cold resolve settle over me. This wasn't just a flirtation. This wasn't just a harmless crush. This was a deliberate, calculated deception. She was building a new life, and she was leaving me out of it. She was leaving me behind. That night when she fell asleep, I got out of bed and went to my home office. I opened my laptop and I started writing. Not a confession, not a letter of ultimatum, but a list. A list of everything I'd seen, everything I'd read, everything I'd heard. I documented it like I was building a case for a trial, because in a way, I was. This was going to be the evidence of my own destruction. This was going to be the story of how my wife killed our marriage. I wrote for hours, the words spilling out of me like poison from a wound. And when I was finished, I sat back and stared at the screen.
The truth was laid bare in black and white, and it was ugly. It was cruel. It was the end of everything. And yet, I still didn't confront her. I still wasn't ready. Because even with all the evidence, even with the photos and the texts and the secret meetings, a part of me was still holding on. A part of me still believed we could fix it. A part of me still loved her so much that I was willing to swallow my pride and my fury and my heartbreak just to keep her. I was pathetic. I know that now. I was a man so terrified of losing his wife that he was willing to let her slip through his fingers just to avoid the pain of holding on too tight. I was a ghost haunting my own life, and I had no idea how to exorcise myself. The week that followed was the longest of my life. Time stopped moving the way it was supposed to. Every hour felt like a day. Every day felt like a year. And I was trapped in this purgatory of suspicion and silence, watching my wife slip further and further away from me. The list I'd written on my laptop grew longer every night. I'd add new details, new observations, new pieces of evidence that I'd collected like a deranged archivist of my own demise. Rachel's phone became my obsession. I'd check it whenever she left it unattended, scrolling through her messages with Mark, memorizing their conversations, cataloging the escalation of their intimacy. They were talking about meeting up. They were talking about how hard it was to be apart. They were talking about how they felt like they'd known each other in another life. I started to see her differently. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd loved for 7 years, was becoming a character in a tragedy I was writing in real time. I'd look at her across the dinner table and see a stranger. I'd watch her brush her hair in the bathroom mirror and see a liar. I'd hold her hand in bed and feel the ghost of his touch on her skin. It was a slow, agonizing transformation, and I was powerless to stop it.
The worst part was that she seemed happier than ever. She was glowing with this secret, illicit joy, like she'd discovered a hidden room in a house she thought she knew by heart. She'd hum while she cooked. She'd dance in the kitchen when she thought I wasn't looking. She'd buy new clothes, new perfume, new lingerie, and she'd wear them around the house like she was preparing for a performance. And I was just the audience, watching from the wings, waiting for the curtain to fall. I started to wonder if she knew that I knew. There were moments when I'd catch her looking at me with this strange, assessing gaze, like she was trying to figure out if I'd noticed something. I'd see a flicker of guilt in her eyes, a momentary crack in her armor, and then it would be gone, replaced by that serene, practiced smile. She was playing a game, and I was the unwitting opponent, but I was learning the rules. I was starting to see the patterns. She'd pick fights with me over little things, trivial things, like the way I loaded the dishwasher or how I'd left my shoes in the hallway. It felt like she was trying to justify her feelings, trying to find reasons to be angry with me so she could feel less guilty about what she was doing. She was rewriting our history, painting me as the villain in her story so she could cast herself as the heroine. And I let her. I didn't fight back. I didn't defend myself. I just absorbed the blows, hoping that maybe, if I was patient enough, she'd come back to me. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon. Rachel had told me she was going to a yoga class, but I knew better. I'd seen the text messages. She was meeting Mark at a hotel downtown. They'd booked a room. They'd been planning it for days, coordinating their schedules, choosing the time and the place with the meticulous care of conspirators.
I'd watched her get ready that morning, the way she'd taken extra care with her makeup, the way she'd chosen a dress that was more appropriate for a date than a workout. She'd kissed me on the cheek and said she'd be back in 2 hours, and I'd nodded and said, "Have fun, honey." I'd been so calm, so composed. I'd been a master of my own destruction. I waited 30 minutes after she left, and then I got in my car and drove to the hotel. It was a fancy place, the kind with a spa and a rooftop pool, the kind that couples went to for romantic getaways. I parked in the garage and walked into the lobby, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I was going to do when I found them. I just knew I had to see it for myself. I had to stop pretending. I had to shatter the illusion once and for all. I went to the front desk and asked for Mark's room number. The clerk looked at me with that polite, professional smile and said they couldn't give out guest information. I was about to argue, to make a scene, when I saw them. They were walking across the lobby, hand in hand, laughing about something. They looked so comfortable, so natural, like they'd been doing this for years. Rachel was wearing that dress, the one she'd bought last week, the one she told me was for a work event. Her hair was down and she was glowing with that same secret joy I'd seen in our kitchen. Mark was wearing a blazer and a crisp white shirt, looking like he'd just stepped off a magazine cover. They were the picture of a perfect couple, and they were everything I wasn't. I stood there, frozen, watching them walk toward the elevator. They didn't see me. They were too wrapped up in each other, too lost in their own little world. And in that moment, I felt something inside me break. I don't know how I made it back to my car. I don't remember driving home. I just remember sitting in my driveway, staring at the house we'd bought together, the house that was supposed to be our forever home, and feeling like I was looking at a crime scene. Everything in there was a reminder of a life that was built on a lie. The photos on the walls, the furniture we'd picked out together, the garden she'd planted with such care. It was all a monument to a marriage that was already dead. I walked inside and went to the kitchen. I opened a bottle of whiskey and poured myself a glass. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to process what I'd just seen. My wife, the woman I'd promised to love and cherish until death do us part, had just walked into a hotel room with another man. She'd chosen him. She'd chosen him over me. I sat at the kitchen table for hours, just staring at the wall. The whiskey burned going down, but it didn't numb the pain. Nothing could numb the pain. I thought about our wedding day, how beautiful she'd looked, how happy we'd been. I thought about the first time we'd said, "I love you," the way her eyes had sparkled. I thought about all the promises we'd made, all the dreams we'd shared. And I thought about how she'd thrown it all away for a man she'd barely knew. A man who was charming and handsome and exciting, but a man who would never love her the way I did. A man who would never know the little things about her, the way she took her coffee, the way she crinkled her nose when she laughed, the way she'd hold my hand in the dark when she was scared. When Rachel came home, she was still glowing. She had that post-coital radiance, that soft, satisfied smile that I used to see on her face after we'd made love. She walked into the kitchen and saw me sitting there, the bottle of whiskey half empty, and her smile faltered. "Hey," she said, her voice uncertain. "Are you okay?" I looked at her, this woman I loved and hated in equal measure, and I felt a cold, terrifying calm settle over me. I was done pretending. I was done being a doormat. I was done letting her destroy me while I stood by and watched. "I know, Rachel," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "I know about you and Mark." She froze. Her face went pale, all the color draining out of it in an instant. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights, trapped and terrified. For a moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. I'd finally caught her off guard. I'd finally taken control of the narrative. But then the satisfaction faded, replaced by a wave of grief that was so intense I could barely breathe. "Jake," she said, her voice trembling, "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't," I said, holding up my hand. "Don't lie to me. Not now, not after everything. I've seen the texts, I've seen the photos.
I was at the hotel. I saw you. I saw you walk in with him." Her eyes widened, and for a second I saw a flicker of recognition in them. She knew I was telling the truth. She knew the game was over. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "How long, Rachel? How long has this been going on?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, her hands shaking, her eyes filling with tears. And I realized that the tears weren't for me. They weren't for us. They were for herself. She was crying because she'd been caught. She was crying because she was afraid of losing everything she'd built. She wasn't crying because she regretted hurting me. She wasn't crying because she loved me. She was crying because she was a selfish, manipulative woman who had taken everything I'd given her and thrown it away for a cheap thrill. "I love you, Jake," she said, her voice cracking. "Please, you have to believe me. I love you. It didn't mean anything. It was just a mistake. It was a stupid, meaningless mistake." "A mistake?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "A mistake is forgetting to take the trash out. A mistake is burning the toast."
This isn't a mistake, Rachel. This is a betrayal. This is years of my life, years of love and trust and sacrifice, and you threw it all away because you wanted to feel wanted by some guy who won't even remember your name in a year. She started to cry, real tears this time, ugly tears. She reached out for me, her hand trembling, and I flinched away from her touch. I didn't want her to touch me. I didn't want her to stain me with her lies. She started babbling, making excuses, trying to justify the unjustifiable. She said she'd been unhappy, that I'd been distant, that she'd felt alone. She blamed me for her infidelity. She took the knife she'd plunged into my back and twisted it, trying to make me believe it was my fault. And for a moment, just a moment, I almost believed her. I almost thought that maybe, if I'd been a better husband, she wouldn't have done this. But then I remembered all the times I'd tried, all the times I'd made her dinner, brought her flowers, told her she was beautiful, all the times I'd held her hand and told her I loved her. And I knew it wasn't my fault. It was hers. It was entirely hers. "I want you to leave," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I want you to get your things and leave." Her eyes widened in panic. "Jake, no, please. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can work through this. Please, I love you. I don't want to lose you." "You already lost me, Rachel," I said, and the words felt like stones in my mouth. "You lost me the moment you chose him. You lost me the moment you lied to my face. You lost me the moment you decided that your happiness was more important than our marriage." She didn't leave. She begged and pleaded, making promises she'd never keep, swearing it would never happen again. She told me she'd block Mark's number, that she'd never see him again, that she'd do whatever it took to earn back my trust. And I listened to her, this woman who had broken my heart into a million pieces. And I felt nothing. The love I'd felt for her, the love that had been the foundation of my entire existence, had evaporated. It was gone, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness that I didn't know how to fill. I went to bed that night alone. I'd made her sleep on the couch, and I lay in our bed, staring at the ceiling, and I realized that I was mourning a death. The death of my marriage, the death of my future, the death of the man I used to be. I'd spent so many years building a life with Rachel, investing my heart and soul into our relationship, and now it was all gone. She'd killed it. She'd murdered our marriage with her lies and her infidelity, and I was left to pick up the pieces. The next few days were a blur of accusations and apologies, of tears and tantrums. Rachel tried everything to win me back. She cooked my favorite meals, bought me expensive gifts, and wrote me letters filled with promises and regrets. She told me she'd made the biggest mistake of her life, that she'd been a fool, that she'd do anything to make it right. But I was immune to her charms. Every time she touched me, I saw him. Every time she told me she loved me, I heard her laughing with him. The betrayal was a wound that wouldn't heal,
and I didn't know if it ever would. I started to think about Vanessa. Poor, broken Vanessa, who had no idea that her husband was having an affair with my wife. I thought about her sitting at our dinner table, talking about how lost she felt, how she was losing Mark, and I felt a surge of guilt. I knew something she didn't. I knew the truth, and I was keeping it from her. I was protecting her from the same pain I was feeling, but I was also enabling the deception. I was part of the lie, and I couldn't live with that. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Vanessa and asked if I could talk to her. I didn't tell her what it was about, just that it was important. She agreed, and we arranged to meet at a coffee shop near her house. I drove there with my heart in my throat, wondering if I was doing the right thing. I was about to destroy another marriage, another family, but I knew I had to, because Vanessa deserved to know the truth. She deserved to know what kind of man she was married to. She deserved to have the same chance I'd been denied, the chance to make an informed decision about her own life. When I walked into the coffee shop, Vanessa was already there. She was sitting at a table by the window, looking at her phone, and she looked so vulnerable, so unaware, that I almost turned around and walked out. But I didn't. I walked over and sat down across from her, and she looked up with a nervous smile. "Hey, Jake," she said. "This is a surprise. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, and I told her everything. I told her about the dinner party, about the texts, about the hotel. I told her that her husband was having an affair with my wife. I told her the truth, the whole ugly truth, and I watched her face crumble as she heard it. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just sat there, her face a mask of shock and grief, and I knew I'd just shattered her world, the same way mine had been shattered. Vanessa didn't say anything for a long time. She just sat there, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth, staring at a point somewhere over my shoulder. I watched her process the information, watched the gears turn behind her eyes as she replayed every interaction, every whispered conversation, every moment she dismissed as her own insecurity. I knew that look. I'd worn it myself in the mirror for weeks. It was the look of a person whose entire reality had just been demolished, and she was sifting through the rubble, trying to find something, anything that was still standing. "I knew," she finally said, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear her. I knew something was wrong. I could feel it. The way he'd look at his phone and smile, the way he'd pull away from me when I tried to hug him, the way he stopped coming home on time. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was being paranoid. I thought it was all in my head. She looked at me then, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. But it wasn't. It was real. It was all real. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was a small gesture, but it was the only comfort I could offer. We were two strangers bound together by the wreckage of our spouse's betrayal, two people who'd been blindsided by the people they trusted most. "I'm so sorry, Vanessa," I said. "I should have told you sooner. I should have told you the moment I found out." She shook her head, pulling her hand back. "No, you did the right thing. You didn't know how I'd react. You didn't know if I'd believe you." She laughed again, that same hollow, bitter laugh. "Part of me still doesn't want to believe you. Part of me wants to walk out of here and pretend this conversation never happened. But I can't. Because I've seen the signs. I've seen them for months. I was just too scared to admit what they meant." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of our shared tragedy pressing down on us. I didn't know what to say. There were no words that could make this better. There was no comfort I could offer that would undo the damage. All I could do was sit there and let her know she wasn't alone. She asked me for details, and I gave them to her. I told her about the texts, about the hotel, about the way Rachel had lied to me. I told her everything, holding nothing back. She deserved the truth, even if it was brutal. She deserved to know exactly what kind of man she'd married. "He's always been like this," she said, staring at the table. "He's charming and handsome, and he knows it. He's used to getting what he wants. I thought I was different. I thought I was special. I thought he actually loved me."
She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "But he doesn't love me. He never did. He just loved the way I made him feel. He loved having someone to come home to, someone to take care of him, someone to make him look good. I was just a prop in his life, a pretty accessory." I knew exactly what she meant. I'd been a prop, too. I'd been the stable, reliable husband who provided the comfortable home and the steady income, while Rachel went out and had her adventures. I'd been the safety net, the fallback plan, the backup option. And when she'd found someone more exciting, someone who made her heart race, she'd tossed me aside without a second thought. It was a humiliating realization, but it was also freeing, because once you know you're just a prop, you can stop trying to be the lead actor. You can walk off the stage and start a new play. "I'm going to leave him," Vanessa said, and there was a steel in her voice that I hadn't heard before. "I'm going to pack my bags, and I'm going to leave, and I'm never going to look back. He doesn't deserve me. He doesn't deserve my love. He doesn't deserve my tears." She wipes her eyes with the back of her hand, a defiant gesture that made my heart ache for her. "I deserve better. We both do." I nodded. "We do. We deserve people who will actually love us, people who will be honest with us, people who will choose us first." She smiled, a small, fragile smile, but it was real. "Thank you, Jake, for telling me, for not letting me live in the dark." She stood up, gathering her purse. "I need to go home. I need to pack. I need to get out of there before he comes back and tries to talk me out of it." I stood up too. "Do you want me to go with you, in case he's there?" She shook her head. "No, I need to do this alone. But thank you. Thank you for everything." She gave me a quick hug, and I felt a strange sense of solidarity with her. We were two survivors, battered and bruised, but still standing. We'd been through the worst, and we'd come out the other side. We'd be okay. We'd have to be. I watched her walk out of the coffee shop, her shoulders squared, her head held high, and I felt a surge of pride. She was stronger than she knew. She was braver than she thought. She was going to be just fine. And so was I. I drove home with a strange sense of peace. I'd done the right thing. I'd told Vanessa the truth, and now she could make her own decisions. I'd broken the cycle of lies and deception, and that was something. I walked into the house, and Rachel was waiting for me in the living room. She'd been crying, her mascara smudged, her face puffy and red. She looked at me with desperate, pleading eyes, and I felt nothing. The love was gone. The anger was gone. All that was left was a cold, empty indifference. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Out," I said. I needed some air. "Jake, please, we need to talk. We need to figure this out. We can't just let our marriage end like this." I looked at her, this woman I'd loved with my whole heart, and I felt a strange sense of detachment. She was a stranger to me now, a stranger wearing the face of someone I used to know. "It's already over, Rachel," I said. "It's been over for a long time. We just didn't want to admit it." "No," she said, shaking her head. "No, it's not over. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can—" "There's nothing to fix," I said, my voice flat. "You cheated on me. You lied to me. You betrayed me in the worst possible way. And you didn't do it once. You did it over and over again for weeks. You chose him, Rachel. You chose him over me, over us. And I can't forgive that. I can't forget it. I can't pretend it didn't happen." She started to cry again, ugly, heaving sobs that shook her whole body. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry. I know I messed up.
I know I hurt you, but I love you. I love you so much. Please, Jake, please give me another chance.
I walked past her, into the bedroom, and I started packing a bag. I couldn't stay in this house anymore. I couldn't sleep in that bed. I couldn't look at her face without seeing his. I needed to get out. I needed to breathe. I needed to find a way to put the pieces of my life back together. She followed me, begging and pleading, but I tuned her out. I focused on the simple act of packing. Shirts, pants, underwear, toiletries. It was mechanical, practical, and it kept me from falling apart. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice small and scared. "I don't know," I said. "I just need to get away from here. I need to think." "Can I come with you?" she asked, and the question was so absurd, so painfully misguided, that I almost laughed. Almost. "No," I said, and I walked out the door. I spent the next week in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place with stained carpets and flickering neon signs, the kind of place where people go to hide from their problems. It was perfect. I didn't have to pretend to be okay. I didn't have to answer questions. I could just be alone with my thoughts, and that was exactly what I needed. Rachel called me 100 times, left me 100 voicemails. I listened to all of them, and I felt nothing. She was sorry. She was heartbroken. She couldn't live without me. It was all just noise. Meaningless, empty noise. I called my brother, Tom, and told him everything. He was shocked, horrified, and furious on my behalf. He wanted to come down and confront Mark himself, but I told him to stay put. I didn't need another fight. I just needed someone to listen. He was good at that. He always had been. He told me I was doing the right thing, that he deserved better, that Rachel was a fool for throwing away what we had. It helped, hearing someone else say it. It made me feel less crazy, less alone. I started to think about what I wanted, what I needed, what would make me happy. I'd spent so many years defining myself by my relationship with Rachel that I'd forgotten who I was without her. I'd forgotten what made me tick, what made me laugh, what made me feel alive. I'd lost myself in the marriage, and now I had to find myself again. It was terrifying, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time in years, I had a future that was entirely my own. I could do whatever I wanted. I could go wherever I wanted. I was free. I started to see a therapist. It was something I'd never thought I'd do, but I needed it. I needed to talk to someone who wasn't biased, someone who could help me untangle the mess of emotions I was feeling. My therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Ellen, was exactly what I needed. She listened without judgment, asked the right questions, and helped me see things I'd been too blind to notice. She helped me realize that my marriage had been broken long before Mark showed up, that Rachel and I had been coasting on autopilot for years, going through the motions without really connecting, that we'd stopped communicating, stopped prioritizing each other, stopped being a team. It was hard to hear, but it was true. I'd been so focused on the betrayal, on the injustice of it all, that I hadn't stopped to look at the bigger picture. The affair wasn't the cause of our problems. It was a symptom. It was the explosive finale of a slow, quiet decline. And that realization was both devastating and liberating. Devastating because it meant our marriage had been dying for a long time, and I hadn't noticed. Liberating because it meant I could stop blaming myself. I could stop wondering what I'd done wrong. I could accept that sometimes people just drift apart. Sometimes love just isn't enough. I also started to think about Vanessa. We'd exchanged numbers, and we texted a few times, checking in on each other. She'd left Mark, just like she said she would. She'd moved into a small apartment near the city center, and she was trying to rebuild her life. She was struggling, but she was getting there. She'd started seeing a therapist, too, and she was starting to realize that her relationship with Mark had been toxic for years. He'd been emotionally abusive, manipulative, and controlling. She'd just been too scared to admit it. We decided to meet up for coffee one afternoon, two broken people trying to find their way back to the light. It was nice seeing her. She looked different. Not happier, exactly, but lighter, like she'd shed a heavy coat she'd been wearing for too long. We talked for hours, sharing our stories, our pain,
our hopes for the future. It was strange how easy it was to talk to her. She understood me in a way that no one else could. She'd been through the same thing. She'd felt the same betrayal. She'd known the same darkness. "We're going to be okay," she said. And it wasn't a question. It was a statement, a declaration. "Yeah," I said. "We are." And I believed it. For the first time in weeks, I actually believed it. I started to think about what I wanted my life to look like going forward. I wanted to travel. I wanted to see the world, to experience things I'd never experienced before. I wanted to write. I'd always wanted to write, but I'd never had the courage to try. I wanted to meet new people, make new friends, build a life that was entirely my own. I wanted to fall in love again, but not until I was ready, not until I'd healed, not until I was whole. The divorce was messy, but it was necessary. Rachel fought it every step of the way, trying to guilt me into staying, trying to convince me we could make it work. But I was done. I was finished. I'd given her everything I had, and she'd thrown it away. There was nothing left to salvage. I hired a lawyer, filed the papers, and started the long, painful process of untangling our lives. It was hard. It was expensive. It was emotionally draining. But it was the right thing to do. I knew that. I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. Looking back, I don't regret any of it. Not the love, not the pain, not the heartbreak. It made me who I am. It taught me things I never would have learned otherwise. It showed me what I was capable of. It showed me that I could survive anything. It showed me that I was stronger than I ever knew.
যে যাবার সে যাবে চলে, তারে নিয়া ভাইবো না, তারে নিয়া ভাবলেই বাড়বে কষ্ট যন্ত্রণা। যে যাবার সে যাবে চলে, তারে নিয়া ভাইবো না, তারে নিয়া ভাবলেই বাড়বে কষ্ট যন্ত্রণা। এত ভালোবাসার পরেও পাইলাম না তার মন, আমারে সারিয়া বেইমান ধরছে আরেকজন। হাত বান্ধিব, পা বান্ধিব, মন বান্ধিব কি দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। হাত বান্ধিব, পা বান্ধিব, মন বান্ধিব কি দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। যাকে তাকে দেখে তাহার লেগে যায় রে ভালা, মুখে তাহার মধু অন্তর বিষেতে ভরা। যাকে তাকে দেখে তাহার লেগে যায় রে ভালা, মুখে তাহার মধু অন্তর বিষেতে ভরা। মিষ্টি কথার মায়া জালে কইরাই আমন্ত্রণ, আমার কলজা খাওয়ায় তাদের কইরা নিমন্ত্রণ। হাত বান্ধিব, পা বান্ধিব, মন বান্ধিব কি দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। হাত বান্ধিব, পা বান্ধিব, মন বান্ধিব কি দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। 12 গাটের পানি যাহার খাইয়াই অবস্থ, এক গাটেতে সে কিভাবে থাকবে রে অস্থ। 12 গাটের পানি যাহার খাইয়াই অবস্থ, এক গাটেতে সে কিভাবে থাকবে রে অস্থ। তাহার কাছে ভালোবাসার নাই রে কোনো দাম, আমার মনটা ভাঙ্গা বেইমান করলো রে খান খান। হাত বান্ধিব পা বান্ধিব মন বান্ধিব কি দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। হাত বান্ধিব পা বান্ধিব মন বান্ধিব কি দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। যে যাবার সে চলে যাবে তারে নিয়া ভাইব না, তারে নিয়া ভাবলেই বাড়বে কষ্ট যন্ত্রণা। যে যাবার সে চলে যাবে তারে নিয়া ভাইব না, তারে নিয়া ভাবলেই বাড়বে কষ্ট যন্ত্রণা। এত ভালোবাসার পরেও পাইলাম না তার মন, আমারে সারিয়া বেইমান ধরছে আর একজন। হাত বান্ধিব পা বান্ধিব মন বান্ধিব কি দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। হাত বান্ধিব পা বান্ধিব মন বান্ধিব কি দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া।